I am not at all, even a little bit, a tiny bit, even a fraction of a bit, a fan or a respecter of Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, for a number of reasons. He was a prosecutor under one of the greatest human rights crimes against children in history, and he refused to see charges filed in the UK because of political correctness. Therefore, I cannot abide this guy. To this moment, his party wants to ignore that massive human rights crime against little girls because of political correctness. I can't abide this guy. I also happen to be somewhat of a free speech absolutist. That used to be ideological. It's not anymore. No, it's not an ideology. I love the First Amendment. I love that our Bill of Rights recognizes that we have rights unalienable because they come because we're made by God. But that's why I'm free speech. That's why I'm a free speech absolutist. Because God gave us the ability to speak. And God holds us accountable for the things we say. I mean, we can sin. We're free to do that. And we can choose our sins. We simply can't choose our accountability. God chooses that for us. But God himself is pro-free speech. Well, Keir Starmer only pretends to be. This never got enough attention because of what happened so quickly with the dictator of Ukraine. But Keir Starmer had his moment in the Oval Office, or moments.
Great. Yeah, look, I said what I said, which is that we do have, of course, a special relationship with our friends in the UK and also with some of our European allies. But we also know that there have been infringements on free speech that actually affect not just the British. Of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology companies and by extension American citizens. So that is something that we'll talk about today at lunch.
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time. Well, no, I mean, certainly we wouldn't want to reach across US citizens, and we don't, and that's absolutely right. But in relation to free speech in the UK, I'm very proud of our history there.
Okay, let's dig into that in just a second. He's talking about a California-based company called Apple, and he's talking about an order they gave in the UK to Apple. So I'll tell you about that in a second, right after I tell you about another California-based company. Please don't blame them that they're in California. I promise they're not communists. I promise there's a reason they stay there. I'm talking about the people at Allen Soaps. So John is Alan's dad, and Alan is a kid. He's 13. He's been through 18 operations. He's effectively nonverbal because of his placement on the autism spectrum. And yet he's an inventive, brilliant kid. Don't even try him on Minecraft. He will smoke you in Minecraft. I don't care how good you think you are. Alan will flat smoke you. He's also a cheerful worker most of the time. He has his moments. I mean, he is autistic, and he's 13. Or probably, I think he just turned 14. They're in California because of a support system for Alan. Family, friends, a specific school. It's a government school, and it's mainstreamed. Alan goes to mainstream school. His dad and mom want him to be in the world, but not of it. After all, they made the decision to not have his life ended, which doctors wanted. So they're in California, but it's not their fault, really. The soap that comes out of Allen Soaps is the world's best. It is made in America by a family who loved what Alan wanted to do with this. And John, no chemicals, nothing unnatural. All the fragrances are unique because they come from special moments in Alan's mind. But the mission of the company is not just world-class soap. It's a world-class mission to employ people like Alan. He works for real. His brother Ian, also on the autism spectrum, he works for real. Amy, who just recently joined them, got late onset autism. She'd been a rock star academically. And then she was no longer neurotypical. And the world said, well, give up. No, she runs social media for them and a lot more. She works. That's the point of the company. Go to allensoaps.com/Todd. That's allensoaps.com/Todd. You get 10% off all their products there. And you can also tell your friends, there's still a few good things that come out of California. allensoaps.com/Todd. So what J.D. Vance was recognizing there was that the UK went to Apple and they said, we're not going to allow you to encrypt the iCloud anymore. So anything your phone stores, the government can browse anytime they want to. This is the same government, of course, that will not let their citizens browse their emails because that's the way it's done. So Apple complied. And people who use iPhones in the UK got a note. Encrypted iCloud is no longer available. Remember this about the UK. They took a shot at being allowed to edit your text messages that you were sending to your friends. Oh, incidentally, they weren't alone. The CDC in our country took a shot at being allowed to edit your text messages, lest you speak something that the CDC doesn't like. But it's Britain where people are being arrested for silent prayer. And it's not just the guy who stood behind the tree silently praying. Now it's a woman who stood several blocks away from a clinic where lives are ended. And she prayed silently. In the UK, there's also literal notes being sent home to people warning them that silent prayer in your house can be an issue depending on who sees it. There is no free speech when acts like that can land you in trouble or in jail. So Keir Starmer is lying about Apple. He is reaching across to U.S. companies, and he's lying about free speech. It doesn't exist there. Of course, they talked about Russia. Subsequent to this meeting, Keir Starmer said something utterly ridiculous. He's willing to put British boots on the ground and planes in the sky to defend defend Ukraine. By some people's counts, the UK now has more admirals than they do warships, and yet they did discuss Russia and Ukraine.
Between our two countries. That is why this is the greatest alliance for prosperity and security I think the world has ever seen. Whenever necessary, we absolutely backed each other up, and that's at the
Could
core
you take on Russia by yourselves?
Well,
all right, one or two more.
Oh my gosh, the look on Keir Starmer's face. He held it together, kind of. But President Trump absolutely knew, I got you. The fact is this, that God has blessed the United States of America uniquely. When Zelensky was in the Oval Office, he kind of snided at the oceans that lie between us and the rest of the world. Zelensky sort of threatened us. You may not feel the pressure right now, but you will one day. God's blessed us with unique resources and landmass. Well, he blessed us with that because I think our governance system recognized him. Right? American exceptionalism isn't our landmass. It's not our people. It's the fact that we are governed at our consent. And the further we get from that, the further we get away from God's design. God, when he designed government, he designed diffuse powers. Think of how Moses changed power. There were 3 separate houses responsible for 3 separate forms of governing the Hebrew people. Our founders looked at that and said, hey, that's a good system. They also looked at other forms of governance, such as dictatorships, monarchies. They rejected those. We've been blessed. And factually speaking, the UK can't take on Russia by itself or anywhere near that. To whom much is given, much is expected. So we're expected to use our armed forces judicially. And this conversation continue with Keir Starmer.
You mentioned Canada. I think you're trying to find a divide between us that doesn't exist. We're the closest of nations, and we had very good discussions today, but we didn't discuss
enough.
Canada.
Thank you. Please.
President Trump waves it away. That's enough. Canada, another country where free speech no longer exists, where some people go protest via truck and their bank accounts are shut down. And what they're said is not allowable, where people are put in prison for refusing to pretend along with their confused children. It doesn't exist there. But Canada's been given much. The UK's been given much. God is pro-free speech. And in each of these countries, speech used to be honored. The further you move towards telling people to shut up or they'll go to prison, the further you move away from God and the closer you move to the other entity. Now, Satan loves it when we speak our tongues here. He loves it when we lash out at others. So he's also pro-free speech. For now. What do you think speech will be like when you spend eternity around beings who have doubled and tripled their hatred, their bile, their disgust, their anger, and their rage for 10 billion millennia? What do you think hell's going to sound like? what kind of speech there? Because you are an eternal being. You're going to exist forever. What do you think speech will be like in the kingdom of heaven, where we've been ultimately sanctified and where our speech is supportive and loving, because that's what heaven is going to be like? So they're both free speech, right? Except one of them wants to use speech to do this, to hurt, and to harm, to divide. The other ultimately to lead us through the process of sanctification to become more like God, which is not always a fun process. But it's one I suggest you accept, because God's not just pro-free speech. He is, in fact, love, the very source of it, because he is it.